talk about telomeres and space radiation, and specifically how space radiation affects our telomeres. To begin, we are going to define what telomeres are and what space radiation is. My computer is glitching out, I'm so sorry. Telomeres are repetitive nucleotide sequences on the end of linear chromosomes that do not code for genes. So they kind of like protect. We'll go more in depth about what telomeres do in a minute. Space radiation, it's atoms in which electrons have been stripped away as the atom accelerated in interstellar space speeds approaching the speed of light. So I know that's a lot to take in at first, so I'm going to kind of like go piece by piece and kind of explain it a bit better. So we have atoms, and each atom has electrons surrounding it, right? So in this scenario, the atom is moving very quickly and it's continuing to accelerate, and in this case it's accelerating in interstellar space speeds, which are near the same speed as that of light. I don't know if that made it more complicated, but this atom is approaching the speed of light. That's that. And as this atom approaches this speed, the electrons that are surrounding the atom are being stripped away and like thrown about. So there are 3 types of space radiation. I'm not going to go into what each of them are, but I just thought it was cool that there were 3 types. There's particles trapped in Earth's magnetic field. I think some people don't really think that there's a whole lot of like space radiation in Earth's magnetic field. Like they think it's like a safe space, but I thought it was kind of interesting that there are particles trapped in Earth's magnetic field. Particles that are shot into space during solar flares, and then galactic cosmic rays. So where are telomeres found? Found on both ends of chromosomes. And what do? They play a vital role in preserving information in our genome. So they, like I said before, they protect. Specifically, they protect the genome from nucleolytic degradation, which is the degradation of nucleotides that make up our genes. Unnecessary recombination and repair. So this is kind of like unnecessary repair is kind of like, in my head, I relate it to cancer because the cells continue to replicate and they're trying to fix it, but they can't, and they just continue to go and go and go. And then interchromosomal fusion, so it keeps the chromosomes from fusing together. That's kind of the idea of that one. So telomeres may serve as a biological clock to determine the lifespan of a cell in an organism. This isn't actually proven, but it is something biologists are looking into. There's not a whole lot of information. I mean, there's the basic information on telomeres, what they do, how they protect the genome, but there's not a whole lot of information regarding the telomeres and relating it to the aging process. So how does space radiation affect the human body? It actually damages our DNA molecules, and this is going to be interesting when we talk about later slides. So keep that in mind. Space radiation affects the human body by breaking DNA molecules, okay? And how does this happen? So the DNA molecules actually absorb lost ionizing radiation. And so they do this because the water in a person's body, an organism, in this case we're talking about a person, the water absorbs this radiation, and this radiation becomes ionized to form highly reactive radicals. And the radicals are water-free, or water-derived. They're not water-free, water-derived. They come from water. And the radicals then react with the DNA molecules, causing the breaking of chemical bonds or oxidation. Then another way, other than the water absorbing this radiation, is the radiation just collides directly with the DNA molecule. So why did I choose this topic? I last year during my 8th grade Bio 2 class, we did a case study on the NASA twin study. We did a case study on telomeres, and we talked about this study. And this study's goal was to determine how living in space potentially impacts human health. So there's this set of twins, and one twin was sent to space, and one twin stayed on Earth. So the twin that went to space, his name is Scott. So Scott was in space for 1 year, and he was aboard the International Space Station. And while he was up there in space, NASA took blood samples continuously throughout his stay up there. And they also took blood samples of his twin who stayed on Earth. The results of these blood tests were that Scott's telomeres actually lengthened while in space. So whenever DNA replicates, part of the DNA, it gets shorter, okay? The DNA chromosome gets shorter each time the DNA replicates. So telomeres actually help and aid in lengthening the DNA so that the essential genes that we have embedded in that DNA do not get cut out with the replication. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, the DNA is supposed to break because of the space radiation, right? But this showed the complete opposite of that. His DNA lengthened, which is insane. The researchers, the biologists, were not expecting this at all. So that was kind of crazy. And I chose to relate this to DNA replication. I kind of mentioned it earlier, but for prokaryotes, replication is in the form of a circle, so there are no ends. So this is not in regard to prokaryotes. In eukaryotes, replication is on 2 linear strands running anti-parallel. So we know our DNA runs anti-parallel to each other. And they have ends. So we know our DNA has ends. But if there are no, the DNA can't go on forever, and we can't leave the ends unprotected, right? So the telomeres are found on the ends of the DNA as a cap to protect our genes and preserve our essential genes. And like I said, they're not lost during replication, which is always a possibility, considering that during DNA replication, the DNA gets shorter. So telomerase is an enzyme that extends the telomeres of chromosomes. I'm so sorry. So telomerase is very similar to the replication of DNA, like the DNA replication process. It is RNA dependent, and telomerase needs a DNA polymerase in order to replicate or complete this process. So because the DNA is shortened, telomerase is an enzyme used to counteract that shortening of the DNA. So it lengthens the telomeres. And this happens telomerase is activated whenever the telomeres reach a critical limit. That's like when the genes get too close to the essential genes, so the telomerase will then begin lengthening the DNA. And it does this through apoptosis. And this process, because telomerase does this is why biologists think that telomeres kind of relate to the aging process, and they determine the lifespan of an organism. And that just kind of helps us understand why telomeres, like the lengthening and shortening of telomeres, because the telomerase lengthens the telomeres, which is what it was doing in space, but it's not supposed to, because the DNA is supposed to be broken by the space radiation. Okay, I hope that cleared up. So how can this idea, these facts, not ideas, how can this advance biology? So I did some reading, and I think it's absolutely insane. Scientists, biologists, everyone's calling this a paradox, not a paradox. Okay, so Einstein had a twin paradox, and he related it to the theory of relativity. And that theory is that the faster you travel through space, the slower you travel through time. So this kind of Einstein is kind of like saying that if you move really quick through space, as Scott was doing in this space thing. I'm so sorry. And because his telomeres lengthened, some would say that he stopped aging or became younger, and that kind of relates to this theory, because that's what this theory is saying. It's a good way to stay young because you're moving slower through time. But it's that's the paradox. And then the paradox on the paradox is that biology says that you're not supposed to be able to do that, because the radiation is supposed to break your DNA. So how does that make sense? I don't really know. They don't know either. So I guess that's kind of interesting. Another idea, or an idea that biologists are looking at, is that maybe the cells that are showing up in the blood samples are just different cells. So the space radiation may trigger a damage response, which leads to more stem cells with longer telomeres. So maybe they're just seeing different cells. Maybe the telomeres aren't actually replicating that quickly and lengthening. Maybe they're just different cells that came about as a damage response, which I think is interesting. There was a few astronauts that had been sent out, but they were not in space for as long, and it was not for the same thing. They were out there doing something, but their telomeres also lengthened. So I think this is a very interesting topic. I think it can continue to grow, continue to like just expand into other things. I would absolutely love to be a part of this study. I think it's fascinating. But yeah, that's all. These are my sources, and I hope you can hear me this time.